The receipt fell out of Vernon's brown work coat on a Monday morning, the 10th of May, 1937, while Mabel Corbett was sorting the wash on the back porch of the little house on Mechanic Street. It was the brown coat he wore when he didn't want to look dressed up, the one with the torn pocket lining he kept promising to have her mend and never did. She went through his pockets the way she always did because Vern carried everything loose. 2 pennies, a stub of pencil, a creamery ticket, a paper of pins that had worked open and stuck her thumb, and 1 folded square of paper, creased in quarters, soft at the folds as if it had been carried a while. She opened it standing over the galvanized tub, with her cuffs rolled and the May sun coming through the porch screens. It was a receipt from the county recorder's office up at the courthouse on the square. Received of Vernon R. Corbett, the sum of $1.50 for the recording of 1 warranty deed. Deed book, 214, page 388. Dated Thursday, May 6, 1937. Mabel stood still with the paper in her wet fingers. Thursday. She could place Thursday without thinking, the way you place a step in your own staircase in the dark. Thursday, she had taken Donnie on the 7:40 interurban to Columbus, to the eye doctor on Broad Street, because the boy had been squinting at the blackboard all spring, and the teacher had sent home a note. They had come home on the 5 o'clock car, Donnie wearing his new spectacles and carrying the case like a prize. Vernon had told her at supper that he'd spent the day at the mill, that the foreman had kept him late over a carload of feed that came in short. Not the mill, the courthouse, recording a deed. She laid the receipt on the windowsill above the tub, weighted it with the clothespin bag, and went on sorting wash. Her hands were steady. That was the strange part, the part she would think about later. No trembling, no heat in the face. 14 years of keeping books and 9 years of searching land titles had trained her for exactly this moment, though she had never imagined the moment would come wearing her own husband's name. You look at an instrument, and something doesn't foot. A date out of line, an acknowledgment in the wrong county, a signature that sits too carefully on the paper. You don't weep over a deed. You don't shout at a mortgage. You note the discrepancy, and you go and pull the record. Only before, the discrepancy had always belonged to strangers. The house on Mechanic Street was not much, and it was everything. 2 stories of narrow white clapboard, with a lean-to kitchen, a privy, a coal shed, a cherry tree by the back fence that her mother had planted the year Donnie was born. 4 rooms down and 2 up. 700 square feet if you measured generous. Her mother had sold eggs for 2 years to buy the green enamel top kitchen table that stood under the window, and that table was the first true piece of furniture Mabel had ever owned. Ray Corbett, Vernon's father, had deeded them the house the week they married in June of 1923. A wedding gift, he said, standing on this very porch, because a man ought to start his marriage under his own roof, and not his mother's. Ray had been dead 6 years this coming fall. Vesta, his widow, lived alone up the hill in the brick house on Cutter Street with 8 rooms, a player piano nobody played, and opinions about everything that happened in the valley below. Mabel finished the wash and hung it on the line, sheet by sheet, in the order she liked. Through the kitchen window she could see the green table, and on it Donnie's school project. A model of this house, built from a Quaker Oats box, with a roof of folded brown paper and 3 little figures cut from a shirt cardboard, standing inside. A tall one, a middle one, a small one. He had carried it to the 3rd grade fair on Friday and brought home a blue ribbon and a dab of paste still on his thumb. "This is us," he had told the lady judge. "This is where we live." She thought about Thursday again. She thought about Vern's face at supper Thursday, no different from any other day, asking, was there more of the fried potatoes? She thought about the 9 years she had spent in the back room of the Belton Abstract and Title Company, in the office behind the courthouse, reading the deeds and mortgages and wills of every family in the county, learning how much of a life can be told in a recorder's book, if you know how to read it. She had searched titles for the bank, for the building and loan, for estates and farms and widows. She knew what a warranty deed meant. She knew what it meant that her husband had walked into the courthouse on the one day in 10 years she was 100 miles away and paid $1.50 to record one. She did not know yet whose name was on the other side of it, but she had been Vesta Corbett's daughter-in-law for 14 years, and she could have written the answer down and sealed it in an envelope. At noon, she walked up to the square with Vern's dinner pail, the way she did every day. Meat and pickle sandwich, 2 oatmeal cookies, a bottle of cold tea. The mill whistle blew while she was still half a block off. Vern took the pail at the gate and thanked her, and asked was Donnie's eye any better with the new glasses. And she said it was, and he said, that's good, and went back inside with the other men. And nothing about him was different at all. That was the part that frightened her. Not the paper in the pocket, the face at the gate. In the afternoon, she did her work. She was bringing up the chain of title on a 40-acre parcel out by the pike, a foreclosure the bank was nervous about, and she did it carefully, grantor to grantee, the way she always did. And only once did she find herself reading the same conveyance 3 times without taking in a word. Mr. Twitchell, who owned the company and had taught her most of what she knew, came through at 4 o'clock and set a new order on her desk. Building and Loan wants a full search on a residence property, he said. Loan application. They want it by Wednesday noon, certified. She looked at the order slip. She had to read it twice, the way she had read the receipt. The property was described by lot and block, and then by the street address in case there was any doubt. Lot 14, Mechanic Street. Owner of record, the clerk had written it off the application, Vesta A. Corbett. Applicant, Vesta A. Corbett, widow. Purpose, mortgage loan, $800. Her house, her kitchen with the green table, her cherry tree. Her mother-in-law was fixing to borrow $800 against it, and the building and loan had sent the title order to the one office in the county where the wife of record sat copying deeds for 32 cents an hour. "Something the matter, Mabel?" Mr. Twitchell said. He was the thin man of 60 with a green eye shade he wore winter and summer, and he missed very little. "No, Mr. Twitchell," she said. "I'll start on it first thing tomorrow." She would, too. That was the thing about 9 years of reading titles. You knew that a deed, once recorded, was not the end of anything. It was only paper. And paper could be true or paper could be false. And there were ways to tell the difference. And there were ways to make the whole county see the difference. And she knew every one of them. She walked home the long way, past the schoolyard where Donnie was waiting on the steps with his spectacles flashing in the sun. And she took his hand, and he told her about a June bug he had caught in a fruit jar at recess, and she listened to every word. At 6 o'clock, she put supper on the green table. At 6:30, Vern came in and hung his hat on the nail and washed his hands at the sink and asked what was for supper. And she told him pork chops and gravy, and he sat down in his chair like a man without a single thing on his conscience. At 7 o'clock, the telephone on the kitchen wall rang, 2 longs and a short, their ring on the party line. Vern got up from the table and took the receiver down and stood with his back to the room, the way he had stood every evening of their married life. "Yes, Mother," he said. "No, everything's fine. Yes. Soon now, don't you worry." Mabel washed the dishes and did not look around. Donnie was under the table with the fruit jar, watching the June bug walk up the glass. Outside, the light went down over Mechanic Street, slow and gold, the way it did in May. And somewhere up the hill, in a brick house with 8 rooms, a widow hung up her telephone and believed that by the end of the week, The little house at the bottom of the hill would be hers, in black and white. And there wasn't a soul in the valley who could stop it. Mabel dried her hands on the roller towel and looked at the receipt, which she had taken off the windowsill and put away flat in the back of her recipe box, behind the card for her mother's vinegar pie. She would go to the courthouse in the morning, and after that she would decide what a person does with the rest of her life. She had 14 years of small things, and until that Monday she had called them small. She came to the Corbett family in June of 1923, 24 years old, a bookkeeper out of the commercial course at the high school, with a cedar chest, a treadle machine, and the green enamel-top table her mother had bought with egg money. Vern was 27 then, the nicest-looking man at the Belton milling office, with a shy way of ducking his head when he said something he meant. He had walked her home from church all spring, and when Ray Corbett stood on the porch of the little house and handed Vern the deed, he had put his big hand on Mabel's shoulder and said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, that he was glad to get a daughter with a head for figures, because heaven knew the Corbett men could spend money faster than they could count it. Vesta had not laughed. Mabel remembered that with perfect clarity now. Everybody else laughed, and Ray laughed hardest, and Vesta stood at the edge of the porch in her good gray silk and looked at the deed the way a person looks at a check written against her own account. It was a small thing. She had called it a small thing. The telephone went in up the hill in 1925, and in the little house in 1929, the year Donnie was born, when the mill was still paying full wages, and Vern said a man with a family ought to have a telephone. From the first month, Vesta rang every evening at 7 o'clock, 2 longs and a short, and Vern got up from whatever he was doing, supper or a bath half-drawn or Donnie on his knee, and stood with his back to the room and answered his mother's questions about his day. Not their day, his. Mabel could have set her clock by it for 8 years. She had tried, early on, to take the receiver herself now and then, friendly, the way a daughter-in-law should. Vesta would ask, was Vernon there? And wait, and after a while Mabel stopped trying. It was a small thing. Wives up and down Mechanic Street had mothers-in-law. That was what marriage was, people said. You married the whole family, whether you liked it or not. The year the mill cut Vern to 3 days a week, that was 1931, the year Ray died, Vesta began coming down the hill on weekday mornings, when Mabel was at the abstract office and Vern was home on his idle days. Mabel would come in at 5:30 and find the pie salved rearranged, her mother's pickle crocks moved to the cellar, and Vesta's glass jars set out in their place, labelled in Vesta's tall, spiky hand. Once she found the green enamel table shoved against the wall and a cloth of Vesta's spread over it, because, as Vern explained with his shoulders pulled up around his ears, Mother said the enamel top showed every crumb, and it wasn't sanitary for the baby. Mabel had put the Crocs back. She had folded the cloth and sent it up the hill by Vern. She had not said anything because Vern's shoulders were already up around his ears, and a body learns what silence costs less than. Small things. The letters that came addressed to Mr. Vernon Corbett and family, as if Mrs. were a word that hadn't been invented. The Sunday dinners up the hill, where Vesta tasted Mabel's gravy and said kindly, in front of whoever was there, that Mabel would learn in time that Corbett men were particular about their gravy. The way Vesta said my son's house and my son's boy and my son's money. And once Mabel had heard it through the screen door, standing on the big house porch with a bowl of tomatoes from her garden. She heard Vesta say to the minister's wife that Vernon had married beneath him. A nice enough girl, but counting house people. And that the house on Mechanic Street was really Corbett property. Ray's idea, a whim of his, and would come back to the family in due course. Mabel had set the tomatoes down and gone home and washed her hands for a long time. Then she had gone to work on Monday and searched a title and kept the books, because in 1931, A woman with a wage envelope was in no position to set fire to bridges, not with a mill down to 3 days a week and a baby in the crib. That was the arithmetic of those years. And she had done it honestly. Vern's 3 days at the mill came to $11, when they came at all. Her 9 years at the abstract company came to $18.50 a week, regular as the courthouse clock. From the winter of 1932 on, it was her envelope that paid the coal man, and the insurance, and the taxes, and Donnie's shoes, and Vern's envelope that paid whatever Vern's envelope paid. Which was a question she had learned not to ask, because asking put his shoulders up around his ears and sent him out to the porch to smoke. And a man out of full work had little enough left without his wife keeping a ledger on him. Every month she handed Vern what was left after the groceries, and every month he carried it up the hill. She had understood it to be for the house, for the old repair mortgage from 1928, the $300 they had borrowed from the building and loan to put on the roof in the furnace, the year before Donnie was born. Vern said Mother was holding the payments for them, that Mother said it was safer to pay through her, that the building and loan knew her and would be easy with them if times got worse. It had seemed like one more small thing. It had seemed, God help her, like family. She thought about all of it that Monday night, lying beside Vern in the dark, listening to the freight go through on the far side of the river. She did not cry. She lay and added up 14 years the way she added up a column of figures, and the total came out the same no matter how many times she ran it. Her husband had gone to the courthouse the one day she was out of town and recorded a deed to the house her wages had kept, and the building and loan had an application on file in the name of Vesta A. Corbett, widow. And widows did not apply for loans against houses that did not belong to them. She got up before Vern, the way she always did, and made the coffee, and packed the dinner pail, and woke Donnie, and buttoned his shirt, and braided her hair in front of the bit of mirror by the kitchen door. She watched Vern eat his eggs. She looked at the face she had slept beside for 14 years, the soft chin, the kind eyes, the mouth that said yes, mother, without moving. And she felt nothing she could name, only that cold, clear space opening up behind her ribs. The space she knew from work, the space where a discrepancy lived until you pulled the record and settled it one way or the other. "You're quiet this morning," Vern said. "I've got a big search to start today," she said. It was the truth. It was the biggest search of her life. At 8:15, she walked Donnie to the schoolhouse and kissed the top of his head, where the hair stood up in a whirl. And at 8:30, she walked past the abstract office, past the barber shop, past the feed store, and up the limestone steps of the courthouse with her handbag on her arm and her library card in her head. And nobody who saw her go in, not the sheriff, not the janitor, not the recorder's girl, thought anything but that Mabel Corbett was on an errand for Mr. Twitchell, which, in a manner of speaking, she was. The recorder's office smelled of dust and paste and the oiled wood of the big deed books, the same as the abstract office, because both rooms lived off the same paper. Edith, the recorder's clerk, knew her the way everyone in the courthouse knew her. "Mornin', Mabel. Twitchell got you on the Fraley foreclosure?" "Finished it yesterday," Mabel said. "I need to verify an instrument for a new search. Deed book 214. Edith brought the book without curiosity. It was a big county. 100 deeds a month went through that office, and every one of them was public business, open to any person with a reason or without one. That was the law and the glory of it, Mr. Twitchell liked to say. The record doesn't care whose name is in it. Mabel carried book 214 to the table by the window, where the light came in good, and opened it to page 388. Warranty deed. Vernon R. Corbett and Mabel E. Corbett, his wife, of Belton, Dearborn County, Ohio, grantors. To Vesta A. Corbett, widow, of the same place, grantee. Consideration: $1 and other valuable considerations. The lot described by meets and bounds. She knew the description by heart, had searched it a dozen times for other people's business. Lot 14, Mechanic Street. Signed, Vernon R. Corbett. Signed, Mabel E. Corbett. And beneath, the acknowledgment. Personally appeared before me Wilbur S. Keck, a notary public in and for said county, the within named Vernon R. Corbett, and Mabel E. Corbett, his wife, who acknowledged the signing of the foregoing instrument to be their voluntary act and deed, this 6th day of May, 1937. And there, in a careful round hand that nobody in the county would have questioned, the name she had been born with and married with and signed 1,000 times. Mabel E. Corbett. Only she had never signed it. She had been in a chair in a doctor's office on Broad Street in Columbus at the hour this deed was sworn to, holding Donnie's hand while he read letters off a chart with one eye covered. She looked at the signature a long time. It was a good forgery, better than most she had caught in her years of searching. And she had caught a few. A widow's name traced by a son, a dead man's mark faked by a partner. This one had her letters right, the tall M and the open C. But it had a stillness to it, a drawn quality, like handwriting in a copybook. Her own hand ran quick and slanted. She had signed her name so many times it had gone to pure habit, and habit cannot be copied, only imitated. Down at the bottom of the page, in the same notary's ink, was the release of dower. And the said Mabel E. Corbett, wife of the said Vernon R. Corbett, does hereby release and quitclaim unto the said grantee all her right and expectancy of dower in the above described premises. Dower. Her dower. The law's own word for a wife's stake in her husband's land, old as the common law itself. And somebody had sat at a table and signed it away in her name, in a hand that wasn't hers, before a notary who had never laid eyes on her that Thursday or any Thursday, and Wilbur S. Keck had written, personally appeared over it like a benediction. She knew Keck. Everybody knew Keck. Insurance office over the drugstore, notary seal on half the paper in the county, and, she had forgotten this or never weighed it, Vesta Corbett's second cousin, the one who drove her to the lodge suppers in his Chandler. She remembered him at Ray's funeral, holding Vesta's elbow. Mabel sat very still in the dusty light. Down on the square, the courthouse clock struck 9. She was not thinking about Vern, not yet, and not about Vesta, not yet. She was thinking the way 9 years had taught her to think. A deed with a forged signature and a false acknowledgment is void as to the defrauded party. But paper has its own momentum, and a deed of record looks like truth to every lender, every buyer, every court that doesn't know better, until somebody stands up with proof and says otherwise. The building and loan would close Vesta's $800 Thursday or Friday. After that, there would be a mortgage of record too, and the building and loan would be innocent, and untangling it would take a lawsuit and a year and money she could see the end of from where she sat. Before Thursday, then, whatever was going to be done would be done before Thursday. She took out her pencil and her abstract sheets and copied the instrument exactly. Every word, every date, the volume and page, the acknowledgment, the revenue stamps. Then she went to the mortgage index and ran the old 1928 mortgage, Mortgage Book 96, page 212, Belton Building and Loan, $300, and found the discharge, entered March of 1932, signed by the president, and in the margin, in the discharge itself, the notation, paid in full by Vesta A. Corbett. She looked at that a long time too. March of 1932, the worst winter. The winter Vern was down to 2 days a week, and she had handed her envelope across the green table every Friday and believed it was going to the building and loan, through Vesta, the safe way, the family way. The mortgage had been paid off in a lump in March of 1932, and her envelopes had kept right on going up the hill for 5 more years, to retire a debt that no longer existed. She copied the discharge, too. Her hand did not shake. She noted, with the part of her mind that never stopped working, that her heart was going hard and steady like a clock, and that she was not angry, and that not being angry frightened her more than anger would have. Then she did one more thing. She went to the window and asked Edith for a certified copy of the deed at book 214, page 388. For the search, she said, for the building and loan, which was on her desk at that moment, and true. Edith charged her 50 cents and stamped the copy, and Mabel folded it into her handbag next to the receipt from the wash and walked back across the square to the abstract office, where Mr. Twitchell's green eyeshade was bent over the Fraley papers, and the rest of her life was waiting for her to decide what it was going to be. At noon, she did not walk up to the mill with the dinner pail. She walked 2 doors past the mill road and climbed the narrow stair over the First National Bank to the office that said H.R. Snow, Attorney at Law, on the glass in black and gold letters, and she knocked and went in. Hattie Snow was 51 years old and the only woman practicing law in the county, which meant she had heard everything people believed a woman couldn't understand, and had stopped being surprised by any of it around 1919. She had a roll-top desk, a shelf of Ohio reports, and a window that looked down on the square, and she took in Mabel's face and pulled out the client's chair without a word of greeting beyond her name. Mabel Pruitt, she said. She was one of 3 people in town who still used Mabel's own name, and Mabel had never asked why she kept doing it, and today she was glad of it. Sit down. Tell it in order. Mabel told it in order, the way she would have reported a broken chain of title. The receipt in the coat, the deed at book 214, page 388, the signature that wasn't hers, the acknowledgment by Wilbur Keck, the discharge of the 28 mortgage paid by Vesta in March of 1932, and the loan application now lying on her own desk at the abstract office, $800 to close this week. She laid the certified copy and the recorder's receipt on the desk. Her voice stayed level all the way through. Only once did it thin out, at the part about the envelopes. 5 years of Friday envelopes going up the hill to retire a mortgage that had been dead since the winter Ray died. And Hattie Snow looked at her sharply then, not with pity, but the way one working woman looks at another when the arithmetic comes out ugly. Hattie read the certified copy twice. Then she took off her spectacles and polished them, which was her way of thinking. "Let me be sure of the facts before I tell you the law," she said. "The house was deeded to Vernon alone in 1923, before your marriage was a week old. You've lived there since. You've paid taxes, insurance, coal, upkeep since 1932, out of your wages, and you can show it." "I keep the receipts," Mabel said, "in the recipe box behind the vinegar pie. My mother taught me. Paper keeps when people don't." Hattie's mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Then hear the law. In this state, a wife has dower in land her husband owns during the marriage, a life estate in 1/3 of it, and it cannot be barred by any deed she doesn't join in. Vernon could deed his interest to his mother or to the King of England, and your dower would ride right along with the land. But that's the thin protection, and it's not the one I'd choose." She tapped the certified copy. "This instrument says you joined. It says you came before Wilbur Keck last Thursday and acknowledged it as your voluntary act and deed, and released your dower. You were in Columbus with your boy, which we can prove by the doctor, the interurban conductor, if need be, and the spectacle receipt. So the acknowledgment is false. And the signature, you say it's not yours. It's not. It's a copy of my letters, made careful. My own hand runs. This one draws. Then the deed is void as to you. Not voidable, Mabel. Void. A forged deed passes nothing against the person whose name was forged. But here is the hurry, and you'd better understand it plain. Hattie leaned forward on her elbows. Right now, today, the record says Vesta Corbett owns your house. The record is what the building and loan will lend on. If that $800 closes on Thursday, the building and loan will hold a mortgage taken in good faith, and they did nothing wrong, and Ohio protects the innocent lender. Unwinding a good faith mortgage means a lawsuit against your own husband and his mother, a year in the common pleas, and money spent that you don't have. The cheap day to stop this is the day before the money moves. That day is tomorrow. Tell me what to do, Mabel said. 3 things, and the third is the one you won't like. First, I file a petition in the Common Pleas Court, Corbett versus Corbett and Corbett, to set aside the deed for forgery and fraud. Second, with the petition, I record a notice of lease pendens at the recorder's office. Pendente lite. A suit is pending. It goes of record against the lot, and from the hour Edith records it, any person who lends a dime against that property takes it subject to your suit. No lender in Ohio will touch it. The Building and Loan's own committee will refuse the application the moment the search shows it. She paused. Which brings us to the third thing. The search, Mabel. Mabel had already seen it coming. She had seen it coming since 4 o'clock Monday, when the order slip landed on her desk. The search is mine, she said. The Building and Loan sent the order to Twitchell's, and Twitchell gave it to me. I'm to certify the title by Wednesday noon. Then you will certify it honestly, Hattie said. You will run the chain of title exactly as you would for a stranger, and you will include the lis pendens, because it will be of record by then, and your certificate will read, subject to that certain pending action in the Court of Common Pleas of Dearborn County, being case number whatever the clerk gives us tomorrow morning, an action to set aside the deed under which the applicant claims. You will hand Mr. Twitchell a true certificate on the house you live in, naming your husband and his mother, with your own signature at the bottom, and half the courthouse will know by Thursday, and all of Belton by Sunday, because Wilbur Keck's acknowledgment is named in the petition, and Wilbur Keck notarizes paper for half this town. She let that sit. There is no quiet way, Mabel. There is a fast way or a slow way, but there is no quiet way. Once the lis pendens is of record, the whispering starts, and your mother-in-law has had 40 years of practice making whispering work for her. I want you to have decided about that before I draw the petition, not after. Mabel sat in the client's chair, with her handbag on her knees. Through the window she could see the square, the hitching rail mostly empty now, everybody's Ford dusty from the dry spring, the flag over the post office moving a little. Somewhere down there was the recorder's office, with book 214 lying closed on its shelf, and the mill where Vern was loading feed cars in his brown coat, and the schoolhouse where Donnie was at his numbers, with his new spectacles slipping down his nose. She thought about whispering. She had been whispered about before. Every woman in a county seat had been. And she thought about how, for 14 years, she had arranged her whole life to keep the whispering to a minimum. The gravy corrected and not argued over. The pie safe rearranged and put back without a word. The envelopes handed across the table on Fridays. The letters answered that were addressed to her husband and family. She had bought quiet at the price of herself, in small, weekly installments, like something off the payment plan at the furniture store. And the quiet had come to this, a signature that wasn't hers, in a book on a shelf, waiting to be lent money against. "Draw the petition," she said. Hattie nodded once, like a judge entering an order. "One more thing, and it's as important as the paper. Does Vernon know you've found it?" "No." "Don't tell him. Not tonight, not tomorrow morning." Not because of him, because of her. "The hour Vesta Corbett knows we've moved, she'll be down at the building and loan begging Mr. Coe to close early, and she has friends on that committee. We get the petition filed and the list pendens recorded first, and then the whole matter is of record and public, and no committee in Ohio will hurry it through as a favor. After that, you can tell him over your own supper table, in your own time." Hattie pulled a sheet of foolscap toward her and dipped her pen. "It's your house in the way that matters, Mabel. We're going to make the record say so. Now, start with the envelopes. Every Friday you can remember what you handed him and what was said. Leave nothing out because it's small." Mabel almost laughed then. A short sound, not much like a laugh. "Small," she said. "I have 14 years of small." She left Hattie's office at 2 o'clock with the petition half drafted and an appointment for 8 the next morning, and she walked back to the abstract office and sat down at her desk under the window and worked on the Fraley papers until 5:30, ordinary as rain, so that Mr. Twitchell would have nothing to wonder about. At 5:30, she stopped at the market for a piece of round steak and a bunch of beets, because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday was round steak. And she walked home down Mechanic Street in the long light, past the Larkin place, where the widow Larkin was out front beating a rug and said the dry spell would ruin the early beans, and Mabel said it would. And neither of them knew yet that by Sunday, the widow Larkin would hear her own name spoken on the party line in a voice like a wire pulled tight, and would make her mind up about things accordingly. That night the telephone rang at 7, 2 longs and a short, and Vern stood with his back to the room, and Mabel dried the dishes and heard, through the little holes in the receiver that leaked his mother's voice the way they always had, the tone of it, if not the words, quick, satisfied, proprietary, the voice of a woman whose papers were all in order. And she heard Vern say, low, that everything was going along fine, and not to worry, and that the loan business would be fixed by Friday, and then Mabel would get used to the idea that people always got used to things. Mabel set the last plate in the rack. She did not bang it. She had a way of doing ordinary things carefully when the cold, clear space was open behind her ribs, and she dried her hands and went and sat on the floor of Donnie's room while he showed her the June bug, which had now been joined by a second June bug and a twig and a bottle cap of water, the whole establishment housed in the fruit jar under the bed. "They're married," Donnie explained. "That's why there's 2. "Is that so?" Mabel said. "The little one's the wife. She found the bottle cap." He considered, serious behind the new spectacles. "She does the finding. He mostly walks into the glass." Mabel laughed, really laughed, for the first time since Monday morning on the back porch, and pulled the boy onto her lap, all 8 knobby years of him, smelling of chalk dust and the penny licorice he thought she didn't know about, and held him a minute longer than the business of June bugs strictly required. Over his shoulder, on the dresser, the oatmeal box house stood, with its 3 cardboard people inside, the tall one, the middle one, the small one. "This is us. This is where we live." "Mama," Donnie said against her collarbone, drowsy with the long spring evening. Grandma says maybe we'll come live in the big house, and renters will live in ours. She says her house has a bathroom with hot water out of a tap. Mabel went very still. When did Grandma say that? Sunday, when you were getting the dessert. He yawned. I said I like our house. Our house has my Beatles under the bed. Grandma's house just has a lot of doilies. Mabel sat holding her son in the pooling dark of the little room, and whatever last soft thing had remained in her, the thing that had said, "Small things, these are all small things," for 14 years, folded itself up like a letter and went away to be filed. You like our house, she said. That's good, because this is our house, Donnie. Yours and mine and Daddy's, nobody else's. I know, he said, surprised, half asleep. The deed's in the tin box. Daddy showed me once. He said a Corbett keeps his deeds in a tin box and his word in his mouth. She laid him down and pulled the sheet up and stood a while in the doorway. Down the hall, she could hear Vern turning the radio dial, trying to catch the market report through the static. An ordinary man in an ordinary house on an ordinary Tuesday evening in May of 1937. And she thought, he showed the boy the tin box. He taught him the saying about the deeds and the word. And last Thursday he sat somewhere, at Wilbur Keck's desk, at Vesta's parlor table, maybe at her own green enamel table, the thought of which came into her mind and would not leave, and let another hand write his wife's name, and paid $1.50 to record it, and came home and ate her fried potatoes, and asked, was there more? She went down and finished the dishes. At 8 the next morning, she would be at Hattie's door with her handbag on her arm. She did not sleep much, but she had not expected to, and she had done harder weeks on less sleep. The winter Donnie had the croup, the week of the bank holiday in 33, when every soul in the county came to the abstract office at once, wanting to know if land was still land when banks weren't banks. It was. That was the lesson she had learned at $20 a week in the back room of the Belton Abstract and Title Company. Paper could lie. Money could vanish. Banks could close their doors with people's whole lives inside. But the record, kept honest, was the one floor that didn't give way. She had spent 9 years keeping it honest for strangers. Tomorrow, she would keep it honest for herself. Wednesday morning, she wore her good grey dress and her hat with the grosgrain band, her working clothes, the ones she wore to the bank and the probate court, the ones that made clerks read her papers instead of her face. She left the house at the usual time, kissed Donnie at the schoolyard gate, and instead of turning toward the abstract office, she climbed the stair over the First National, where Hattie Snow was waiting with the petition typed in triplicate and 2 sheets of foolscap covered in her own upright hand. Read it before you sign it, Hattie said. A petitioner who reads her own petition is rarer than you'd think. Mabel read it. It was a plain document, plainer than she had imagined. No thunder, no wailing. It said that on the 6th of May, 1937, a certain warranty deed purporting to be the act of Vernon R. Corbett and Mabel E. Corbett, his wife, was made to Vesta A. Corbett, that the plaintiff, Mabel E. Corbett, never signed the said deed, that her purported signature thereto was and is a forgery, that she was in fact in the city of Columbus on the said day, as the attached affidavit of Dr. H. C. Voorhees, oculist of Broad Street, Columbus, would show. Hattie had put her on the long-distance telephone to the doctor's office at 8:15, and the doctor, a gentleman of the old school, had been scandalized on her behalf and promised his affidavit by the morning mail. That the acknowledgment of Wilbur S. Keck, notary, was false, the plaintiff never having appeared before him, and that the plaintiff prayed the deed be declared void and of record cancelled. Under her name, in her own quick, slanting hand, so that the court, Hattie said dryly, could begin its education in handwriting immediately. Mabel E. Corbett. The common pleas clerk was a round man named Bixler, who had gone to school with Hattie and did not waste her time. He stamped the petition at 9:06 and gave it a number, case number 4371. The Liss Pendens notice, 1 page, names of the parties, description of Lot 14, Mechanic Street, the object of the action. Mabel carried herself downstairs along the corridor with the marble wainscoting worn hollow by 70 years of elbows into the recorder's office, where Edith took it and read it, and then looked up with her mouth open. "Mabel," Edith said, Mabel, this is your house." "Yes," Mabel said. "Record it, please, Edith. I'll want the book and page." Edith recorded it. Her hand shook a little over the fee book. It was the first time in the 9 years of their acquaintance that Mabel had ever seen the record touch somebody they both knew, and she understood, watching Edith's face, that what she was feeling was the first drop of the rain that was going to fall on this town. She paid the fee, wrote the book and page in her notebook in her quick, slanting hand, and walked back across the square in the hard, bright morning. And there was a moment on the courthouse steps when she had to stop and hold the limestone rail, not from fear, but from the sheer size of it, the size of a thing finally done in the open after 14 years of things done around her, behind her, underneath her name. Then she went to the abstract office, sat down at her desk, and searched the title to her own house. She did it exactly right. She would not have done it any other way. She could not have, any more than she could have signed her name in someone else's hand. Grantor to grantee, from the government survey forward, the patent, the old plats, Ray Corbett's purchase in 1911, the 1923 deed to Vernon R. Corbett, in consideration of love and affection and $1. She copied the words love and affection without letting herself stop on them. The 1928 mortgage to the building and loan, the 1932 discharge, paid in full by Vesta A. Corbett, and then the 2 instruments of the last 6 days, the warranty deed of May 6th, book 214, page 388, and, beneath it in her certificate, in the impersonal language that had always been her trade and was now her weapon. And further appears of record a notice of Liz Pendens, recorded May 12, 1937, in Liz Pendens Record 3, page 61, in an action pending in the Court of Common Pleas of Dearborn County, Ohio, being case number 4371, Mabel E. Corbett versus Vernon R. Corbett and Vesta A. Corbett. The object of said action being to set aside and cancel the deed last aforesaid upon the ground of forgery and fraud. Title to said premises is therefore subject to the outcome of said action, and this company cannot certify same as marketable. She signed the certificate Mabel E. Corbett for the Belton Abstract and Title Company, and laid it on Mr. Twitchell's desk at 11:40. 20 minutes before the deadline. Mr. Twitchell read it standing up. He read it twice. The green eyeshade came up and showed his eyes, which were pale and very sharp, and for a long moment the office was so quiet she could hear the courthouse clock through the wall and the barber's clippers downstairs. "The deed to Vesta," he said at last. "Forgery. That's a grave word to put on paper, Mabel. I was in Columbus with my son on the 6th of May, Mr. Twitchell. I never signed that deed, and I never stood before Wilbur Keck in my life." He looked at her another moment. Then he did something she did not expect. He sat down, pulled the certificate toward him, and signed his own name beneath hers. Twitchell's countersignature, the one that meant the company stood behind the searcher. "I've read your certificates for 9 years," he said. "Never found one wrong yet. I don't expect to start today." He blotted his signature and handed the certificate back. "Take it over to Co. yourself. It's your search. And Mabel—" He hesitated, and the thin old face did something complicated. "Whatever happens at the building and loan, you have a desk here as long as I have a door to put it behind." She carried the certificate across the square at noon, up the marble steps of the Belton building and loan, past the calendar with the picture of the clipper ship, and laid it before Mr. Coe, the president, a big, careful man who had known her father. He read it. He got redder by the paragraph. When he came to the Liss Pendens, he said a word that presidents of building and loans were not supposed to say in front of lady searchers, and then he begged her pardon, and then he picked up the telephone and told his secretary that the Corbett application was off. Off, you heard me. Put it in the refused file, and to cancel Mrs. Vesta Corbett's appointment for tomorrow morning. "Her appointment," Mabel said carefully, "was for tomorrow?" 9 o'clock sharp. Mr. Coe mopped his forehead. "She's been in here twice this week, wanted it rushed, wanted it Thursday, said it was family business and the committee wouldn't want to keep a widow waiting." He looked at the certificate again, and at Mabel, and it was plain that a good deal of arithmetic was going on behind his forehead. $800 against a house the daughter-in-law says was signed away with a forged hand. In God's name, Mabel. If this had closed, the association would have been in the common pleas till 1940. He stood up and put out his hand, formally, the way men did at the end of business. "I'm obliged to you. More than obliged." She walked home in the noon heat with her hat in her hand. It was done. The part that had to be done before Thursday. The money would not move now. No mortgage would cloud the record. Whatever came next would come in open court, with a judge, and the record she had spent 9 years learning to read would be made to tell the truth. Vesta Corbett learned it at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Mabel knew the hour exactly, because at 2:10 the telephone on the kitchen wall rang, not 2 longs and a short, but a long, furious, continuous ring. The ring you used when you wanted the whole party line to lift its receivers, and Mabel, who had come home with a headache and a lie to Mr. Twitchell about needing the afternoon, stood and looked at the telephone and let it ring itself out. It rang again, and again. On the 4th ring she heard, faint and ghostly through the receiver still on its hook, the clicks as the women of Mechanic Street and Cutter Street picked up, one by one, to listen. She took the receiver down. Her mother-in-law's voice came down the wire like something drawn tight to breaking. She did not say hello. She said that Mabel had a great deal of nerve, that she had called the building and loan a liar's den and Mabel Corbett a snake in it, that after everything the Corbett family had done for her, taken her in, a counting house girl with nothing, given her a Corbett roof and a Corbett name, this was the gratitude. Lies in the public record. Forgery. Forgery. When she, Vesta, had watched the deeds signed with her own eyes at Wilbur Keck's desk. And who was going to believe a paid bookkeeper against a notary and a mother? Mabel stood in her own kitchen, with the green table at her elbow and the recipe box on the shelf, and listened to every word. And somewhere in the middle of it, she understood with perfect cold clarity that this was the moment her 14 years of quiet had been purchased to avoid. This voice, this wire, the invisible ears of Mechanic Street, pressed to a dozen receivers. It had come anyway. It was not going to kill her. That was the surprise of it. The storm she had feared for 14 years was just a voice on a party line. And there were worse things than being talked about, and she was living proof that one of them was never being talked about at all. When the voice stopped for breath, Mabel said, level, into the mouthpiece, "I never signed that deed, Vesta. I was in Columbus with your grandson. And a notary who swears a woman appeared before him when she was 100 miles away has more to worry about than my gratitude. She hung up. The line hummed. Down the wire she could feel them all listening. The Larkin widow, the minister's wife, the feed store man's sister. And she found she did not care. Or rather, she cared in a new way. Let them hear. Let the whole line hear. The record didn't care whose name was in it. And from now on, neither did she. Vern came home at 6:30 with his hat in his hand, which she had never seen him do in 14 years. Vern hung his hat on the nail without thinking, the way a horse goes to its own stall. He stood inside the kitchen door, holding the hat with both hands, and she knew that he knew. Donnie was at the widow Larkin's, eating supper with her grandson. Mabel had arranged it at 4 o'clock. Over the fence. And widow Larkin, who had listened on the party line like everyone else and drawn her own conclusions, had taken the boy in with a pie and no questions. The little house was very quiet. The green table stood between them, set for two. Vern said his mother had telephoned the mill. He said it the way a man reports weather, flat, helpless, a thing that had happened to him. She was upset. She said there was some kind of paper down at the courthouse, some kind of lawsuit, with his name in it. He said, his voice going slower and slower as he watched Mabel's face, that Mother said it would all be fixed, that Wilbur Keck would fix it, that it was just a misunderstanding about the loan, and that Mabel shouldn't worry about the house business. Mabel put the potatoes on the table. She sat down in her own chair. She folded her hands. "Vern," she said, "I know about the deed." He stood very still, with his hat in his hands. She watched it come over him. Not surprise, that was the thing she would remember. Not one flicker of surprise. Only the tired sag of a man whose hold on a thing has finally let go. The way she had seen men stand at the mill gate in 1931 with their dismissal envelopes. "How?" he said. Not a question, hardly. A sound. "The recorder's receipt. In your brown coat. Monday. Over the wash." She kept her voice even, the way she would give a report. "I'm a title searcher, Vern. Did you forget that? Or did you never know it? I pulled book 214, page 388, Tuesday morning. Warranty deed. You and me to your mother, $1. Dower released. Acknowledged before Wilbur Keck on the 6th of May. She looked at him. "I was in Columbus on the 6th of May, Vern. I was holding our son's hand in the eye doctor's chair. So I would like you to tell me one thing, and I'd like it to be true. Who signed my name?" He put the hat down on the green table. His hands were shaking now, big hands, a miller's hands, and he sat down across from her in the chair he had sat in for 14 years, and he looked at the enamel top with the crumbs of 14,000 suppers wiped off it, and the words came out of him the way a splinter works out of flesh, slow and crooked, and with relief underneath the pain. "It was Pearl Denny," he said, "Keck's stenographer, the little one with the Marcel wave. It had been Keck's notion. They had done it at Keck's office, Thursday morning, early, Vern and his mother and Keck, and Pearl called in from the outer room and told to write the name Mabel E. Corbett in her best round hand on the line Keck showed her, as a favor, because Mrs. Corbett, Vesta, explained that the daughter-in-law was poorly that day. Poorly, and not in her right mind about business, and the family was only putting the house where it would be safe, and a man's mother wouldn't steer him wrong. Keck had a form for everything. Keck said it was done all the time. Wives signing for husbands, husbands for wives. One family, one purse. And that the acknowledgment was a formality when everyone concerned was of one mind. "Were you of one mind?" Mabel said. Vern's shoulders went up around his ears. She had seen that gesture 10,000 times. At the big house, at the supper table, at the mill gate. She had once thought it meant shame. She understood now that it meant shelter. A man pulling his head in under the nearest roof. "Mother said," he began and stopped. "Mother said," Mabel repeated. She did not raise her voice. "Tell me what Mother said, Vern, all of it. I've earned the hearing of it. 14 years of Fridays, I've earned it." And so it came out, the whole crooked shape of it, there at the green table with the potatoes going cold. It had started in March, Mother worrying that times were getting worse again, that there'd be another bank trouble, that a house in a man's own name was a house any creditor could attach, any lawsuit could take. And then Vern's voice went lower. Mother had a fear she didn't quite say straight out, that Mabel had a wage and a trade and a family in Marietta, and women with wages had been known, in these times, to take their children and go. And if Mabel ever went and there was a divorce, a court could give her a share. Mother had read about it. Mother knew a woman in Zanesville it had happened to. And the Corbett house, Ray's house, would be sold under a stranger's gavel to pay a counting house girl who never loved anybody but herself. "It was for Donnie," Mother said. "Put the house in my name, Vern, and no court and no creditor and no wife can ever take it off the boy. I'm an old woman. I'll only hold it. It'll come back. It's just paper." "It's just paper," Mabel said. "And the $800, what was that for?" Vern's face did something she had never seen it do. What $800? And there it was, the thing she had not known she was waiting for, the last stone turning over. He didn't know. His mother had told him the loan was a formality, insurance business, nothing for him to trouble his head about, or had told him nothing at all. Mabel watched her husband understand, in real time, across the table where she had fed him for 14 years, that even in his betrayal, he had not been trusted with the whole of it. Vesta had not wanted the house for Donnie, or not only for Donnie. Vesta had wanted $800 against it, for what, they would learn soon enough. The whole town would learn. And Vern had signed away his roof and let a stenographer write his wife's name, for a reason his own mother hadn't bothered to tell him. She was going to borrow against it, Mabel said, against our house. She applied Thursday. The order for the title search came to my desk, Vern. To my desk. That's the kind of joke God tells. She pushed her plate away, untasted. Now I'll tell you what I've done, and then I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Monday I found the receipt. Tuesday I pulled the deed. Tuesday noon I hired Hattie Snow. This morning she filed a petition in the Common Pleas, case number 4371, to set aside the deed for forgery, and I recorded a lis pendens against the lot, and I certified the title to the building and loan myself, with the suit noted, the way I'd certify any title in this county. Mr. Coe refused the application at noon. There will be no $800, Vern. There will be no mortgage. There will be a trial, and Dr. Voorhees's affidavit, and Pearl Denny under oath, and Wilbur Keck explaining to a judge what the words personally appeared mean in the state of Ohio. Vern sat with his hands lying loose on the enamel top, palms up, like a man showing he held nothing. You did all that, he said at last, wonderingly. Since Monday. Since Monday. You never said a word. He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet, and she saw that he was not angry. He was afraid, and under the fear, God help him, there was something almost like admiration, and the sight of it moved through her like a draft through a house, cold and final. You sat across from me at this table for 3 days, Mabel, and you never said a word. No, she said. I learned how in this house. I had a good teacher. She stood and took the plates, though neither of them had eaten, because her hands needed a task the way they had on Monday over the wash. I'm filing for divorce, Vern. Hattie's drawing the petition tonight. Gross neglect of duty and fraud. It won't be a secret. Nothing in this town is a secret after today. You'll want to go up the hill, I expect. Your mother's got 8 rooms and a player piano, and she's about to need family around her more than we do. Mabel. He got up. He came around the table, and for a moment she thought he would put his arms around her, and she felt her whole body go to stone in preparation. But he stopped a yard off, the way you stop from a stove. Mabel. The envelopes. Every Friday, near 6 years. I want you to know I hated it. I hated it every Friday. She said it was to retire the mortgage, and then when I found out the mortgage was paid, she said it was rent on account, that the house was Corbett property, and a wife's wage belonged with the family that gave the family its roof. And I... His voice cracked like a boy's. I knew it wasn't right. I knew it the first Friday. It's easier to carry a wrong thing than to set it down. You don't know. You've never carried one. Mabel stood at the sink with the cold plates in her hands, and she thought about that. She would think about it for years. About whether it was the truest thing he had ever said to her, or only the most convenient. About the difference between carrying a wrong thing and being the thing carried. I'm carrying one now, she said quietly. It has your name on it. Go on up the hill, Vern. I'll send your things Saturday by the Larkin boy. He went. He took his hat off the green table and his brown coat off the nail. She would find the torn pocket mended months later, and never know when in those last days he had done it or why. And he stood a moment in the door, with the May evening behind him, and he said, not looking at her, that the house was a good house, and that she had kept it better than anybody, and that he was sorry, and that he knew sorry was a nickel word. Then he went out, and she heard his steps on the porch, and then on the cinder path, slower and slower, up the hill toward the brick house, where a telephone was already ringing. 2 longs and a short. Somebody else's ring now. And Mabel Corbett locked her own door, with her own key, for the first time in 14 years, and went to fetch her son home from the widow Larkins through the long gold light. The rest of it came out the way truth comes out in a county seat, not in a flood, but in seeps, from the places where paper is kept. Hattie Snow found the first seep in the probate court, in the file of the estate of Ray Corbett, deceased, which was public business like everything else in that courthouse, and which nobody had opened since 1932. Ray had left the brick house to Vesta, free and clear. He had also left a life insurance policy, $1,000, payable to his son, Vernon R. Corbett. The file showed the receipt for the money, signed in March of 1932 by Vesta A. Corbett as her son's agent, with a power of attorney attached that Vern had signed, Hattie said, in his mother's parlor, probably without reading it, probably with his shoulders up around his ears, in the worst month of the worst winter, when a man out of work will sign whatever is put in front of him by whoever is feeding him. $1,000. Collected, March 1932. 300 of it had gone, that same month, to the Belton Building and Loan, to discharge the roof and furnace mortgage on the Mechanic Street house. The discharge Mabel had read in the margin, paid in full by Vesta A. Corbett. Vesta's name on the record, as if the money had been hers. And for 5 years after, every Friday, Mabel's wage envelope had gone up the hill to retire that dead debt. $18 a month, then $20, on account, marked down in a little black account book that Vesta kept in her parlor desk, which the court would eventually see, in an action that Hattie styled, with grim pleasure, a suit for money had and received. "Your husband's inheritance paid off your mortgage," Hattie said, laying the copies on her desk between them. "Your mother-in-law recorded it as her own generosity, and then collected 5 years of rent from you on a debt she had created out of your husband's own money, and never told either of you existed. Counting the envelopes, Mabel, she took the better part of $1,100 from this family, and turned $300 of Vernon's own money into a leash she led him with for 6 years." She took off her spectacles. "Do you want to know what the $800 was for? The brick house on Cutter Street has a mortgage on it. $760, taken in 1935, when her annuity from Ray's railway pension was cut. She's behind on the interest. The bank was going to foreclose the big house this summer. She wasn't stealing your house to keep it for Donnie. She was stealing it to save hers. And she was going to do it with your name on a deed you never signed, and tell the town it was gratitude." Mabel sat with that for a while. She thought she would feel triumph. What she felt, mostly, was tiredness. A great, settled tiredness, as if she had been carrying the brick house herself all these years, without knowing it was on her back. And under the tiredness, something small and warm and stubborn that she recognized, after a minute, as pity. Not forgiveness. Pity. The kind you feel for a person standing in the wreckage of a house they set fire to themselves. Vesta Corbett had had 8 rooms and a player piano, and a son who came when the telephone rang, and it had never once been enough to make her feel safe, and now it never would be. "Poor Vesta," Mabel said at last, and Hattie Snow, who had expected anything but that, looked at her for a long moment and then wrote it down in her notes, word for word, because it was the kind of thing a jury should hear in a woman's own voice. The end, when it came without thunder. Wilbur Keck folded first. Confronted in Hattie's office with Dr. Voorhees's affidavit, the interurban ticket stubs Mabel had kept out of habit in her handbag, and the prospect of explaining his acknowledgment to a common pleas judge and to the Secretary of State, who issued notary commissions and could take them away, Keck produced, within the week, a written statement. The signature had been affixed by his stenographer in his office at his direction on the representation of Vesta Corbett that the wife consented and was unwell. He had not seen Mabel Corbett on May 6th or any day near it. He deeply regretted. Pearl Denny, 19 years old and crying into her handkerchief in the same office, told Hattie she had written the name because Mr. Keck said it was done all the time, and she was afraid for her job, and that she had thought of it ever since and not slept because her own mother kept a boarding house, and she knew what a house meant to a woman. Hattie sent her home with a peppermint and a promise that no one would proceed against her. "Never write another person's name again, Pearl," she said at the door. "Not for a boss, not for a bishop. Your hand is the only one the law lets you use." With Keck's statement in hand, the deed was finished, and everyone with a name on it knew it. Vesta's lawyer, she got one from Zanesville, a shiny man who billed by the letter, took one look at the file and advised settlement. And what followed was 2 weeks of paper moving back and forth over the square while the town watched the way a town watches weather. In June, by consent decree of the Common Pleas Court, case number 4371, the warranty deed of May 6, 1937, was declared void, canceled of record, book 214, page 388. And the recorder wrote the cancellation in the margin of the deed book in red ink, so that any searcher for the next 100 years would see the story told in 2 lines, a name written false and a name set right. The divorce came later and slower, the way those things went. Gross neglect of duty, uncontested in the end, Vern appearing in his good suit, and answering the judge's few questions in a voice so low, the court reporter twice asked him to repeat. The property settlement was Hattie's craft at its finest. Vernon quit-claimed the Mechanic Street house to Mabel, and the little black account book came down the hill with the quitclaim as Exhibit A in the money action, which Mabel agreed to dismiss. Not forgiven, she was careful to say. Dismissed. Which was a legal word, and a truer one, in exchange for the house, the account book, and a written schedule, signed by Vesta and Vernon both, acknowledging that the money of record had been Mabel's wages and Vernon's inheritance, and not 1 cent of it the widow's bounty. "I don't want her money," Mabel told Hattie. "I want the record right. I've spent my whole life in the record. It's the only inheritance my work can leave my son. A book that tells the truth about who paid for the roof over his head." The brick house went to the bank in September, quietly, the way those things went. Vesta moved to a room over her niece's garage in Zanesville, with the player piano in storage and the little black account book gone out of her desk forever. The town, being a town, talked for a month and then found other weather. The Ladies' Aid sent no delegation. The minister's wife called once with a cake and was received politely and left, Mabel suspected, with less material than she had hoped. The widow Larkin, who had heard everything worth hearing on the party line in May, brought a pie every Friday for a year and never once asked a question, which Mabel understood to be the highest form of respect their street afforded. Vern saw Donnie on Saturdays. That was the arrangement, and Mabel kept to it strictly, because a boy was not a debt, and she would not have him collected from. Vern took him fishing on the river, and to the picture show when there was a nickel. And once, in the fall of 1937, he came with his toolbox and reset the porch steps of the little house, which had gone soft, without being asked, and without saying much, working all afternoon in his good shirt with the sleeves rolled. Mabel set a plate for him at the green table that evening, because Donnie's eyes had asked the question, and she had answered the boy instead of the history. Vern ate what was put before him and thanked her, and fixed the catch on the screen door before he left, and at the gate he said, not for the first time and not expecting an answer, but he was sorry. And Mabel said what she had said each time, that sorry was a nickel word, but the porch steps were $1 worth of work, and she was not a woman who turned away honest work. It was not forgiveness. She did not know the name for it yet. She knew only that the door of her house opened and closed at her hand now, and that a door you can close is a door you can also, once in a while, open. He had gone to work at the feed store in the end. The mill took on no one that year, and he lived in 2 rooms over the barber shop, and the widow Larkin reported, without being asked, that he kept them clean, and that he had told Keck, on the square in front of witnesses, that he did not care to have his insurance with a man who didn't know who was standing in front of him. It was a small thing. Mabel had stopped weighing Vern's small things. She had her own to weigh now. Because the last turn of it, the turn she had not planned, the one that grew like a volunteer vine out of the wrecked rose of that spring, was this. A title searcher with a courtroom reputation is a person a county discovers it needs. It began with Mr. Coe at the Building and Loan, who sent her the association's searches direct and told the other banks why. It continued with the probate judge, who had read her certificate in case number 4371 and asked Hattie Snow, in chambers, who that searcher was, with the hand like a steel nib, and the nerve to certify against her own kitchen roof. By the winter of 1938, Mabel was doing more searching out of her front room than Mr. Twitchell could assign her, and in April of that year, the year the country slid back into the hard times people were calling the recession, when work was scarcer than ever and a woman with a trade was a family with a future, she did the thing she had been turning over since the June night the consent decree came back signed. Mr. Twitchell, who was 61 and tired and owed her nothing, gave it his blessing and his overflow and the loan of his second deed books until hers came from Cincinnati. Hattie Snow drew the papers. And on a Monday morning in May of 1938, 1 year to the week after a receipt fell out of a brown coat over a washtub, a painter climbed a ladder over the vacant rooms above the notion store on the square and lettered the window in black and gold, the same style as Hattie's glass 2 doors down. Mabel had stood on the sidewalk with her hat on and watched every letter go on. And when the painter was done, he came down and wiped his hands and asked, "Was it spelled right?" And she said it was. Pruitt Abstract and Title Service. M.E. Pruitt, Prop. Her own name. Her maiden name, the one she had signed in a quick slant since she was 17. The name her father had given her, along with the advice, delivered on this very square when she took her first job, that a person's name is the only deed they're born holding, and to keep the record of it clean. The divorce court had restored it as a matter of form, a line in the decree nobody read aloud. She had read it aloud, alone in her kitchen, at the green enamel table, with the cancelled deed in its certified copy lying beside the sugar bowl. Book 214, page 388. Margin marked in red, and the account book that had come down the hill, and the receipts from the recipe box. All of it spread out on the enamel top like a hand of cards she had finally been permitted to play. The first customer was the widow Larkin, who wanted the title searched on her late husband's 40 acres before she let the oil company man so much as open his sample case, and who paid in cash and in advance, and told the church basement that Pruitt's office had found a break in the chain from 1874 that the oil company's own man had missed, which was true, and worth more than any advertisement Mabel could have bought in the Belton Weekly Signal. Donnie was 9 that spring, tall for it, his spectacles thicker, the June bugs long since released to their own affairs. He had taken the oatmeal box house down from the dresser when the sign went up, and Mabel had watched him work over it at the green table for a week of evenings, with paste and shirt cardboard and the stub of a brush. On Saturday he showed her. The little house stood as it always had, the folded brown paper roof, the windows drawn in his careful hand, the 3 figures inside. But over the door he had added a new sign, lettered in his 9-year-old's printing on a slip of ruled paper, and below the house, on the base, a second building with a door painted gold. "This is us," he said, the way he had said it at the 3rd grade fair, a year and a lifetime ago. "This is where we live, and this is Mama's office. I put her name on it." He sounded it out, pleased, the new old name he was learning to write. Pruitt. "Grandma used to say the house would come back to the family." He considered the model, head on one side, and delivered, with the terrible justice of children, the verdict of the whole affair. It did. Mabel Corbett, Mabel Pruitt. And she answered to both that year, the way a person answers to a name while it's growing back. Stood behind her son at the green enamel table her mother had bought with egg money, in the house the record now said was hers, and looked at the little cardboard building with the gold door, and at the cherry tree coming into bloom past the window, the tree her mother had planted the year the boy was born. She thought about the receipt in the coat pocket, and how it had felt like the end of something. It had been. It had been the end of paying for quiet in weekly installments, the end of gravy corrected at other people's tables, the end of her name written in other people's hands. It had taken a county recorder's book, a woman lawyer with a steel-trap mind, an oculist's affidavit, a 19-year-old stenographer's conscience, and 9 years of knowing where paper was kept. But mostly, it had taken the thing her mother had taught her without ever saying it straight out. the thing written on no deed in any book, that a house is not walls, and a name is not ink. A house is where you decide. A name is what you decide with. She set the table for Sunday dinner, for Donnie and Widow Larkin, and her sister Ina up from Marietta on the noon train. The first Sunday dinner cooked in that kitchen with no ring on the party line at 7 to pull anybody away from it. The gravy she made the way her mother had taught her, and nobody corrected it, and nobody asked for anything to be passed with a sigh, and the green enamel top shone in the spring light, wiped clean of everything but what belonged on it. Outside, the church bells were ringing up and down the valley, and the courthouse clock on the square struck 12 over her office with the gold lettering, over the recorder's books with her name set right in them, over the whole listening, whispering, enduring town. And Mabel Pruitt sat down at the head of her own table, in her own house, under her own name, and picked up the serving spoon and began.